Well, hi Scott, thanks for joining us today.
Sure.
Glad to have you as our volunteer of the quarter this quarter. And this quarter we're focusing on meeting facilitation because we have our training coming up. So why don't you start us off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I'm Scott Goering. I've been here in San Francisco about 23 years. Professionally, I'm a lawyer, mediator, and I also sell residential real estate here in San Francisco. Prior to law school, I had a long history, about 10 years in private nonprofit organizations working largely with kids. And went to law school about 12 years ago. Been an attorney for about 10 years now.
Great. Well, we love having you here at Community Boards and really appreciate all the wonderful volunteer work you've been doing with us, both as a mediator and a meeting facilitator. So why don't you tell us, how did you come to be involved with Community Boards?
Well, Community Boards is pretty well known in the city. I recognize the need for, whether it's recognizing the need for mediation from a legal perspective or just generally peacemaking in general, recognizing that there are ways for people to solve their problems before they get worse, before they get dragged into court. I've always had a real value for that. And I knew some people who were involved with community boards. I saw the kind of work that they were doing. I thought that's something I wanted to do for myself as well.
Wonderful. So what motivated you to become a meeting facilitator?
Well, I've also had a real interest in seeing the sorts of conversations that can take place when you have lots of people in the room. There's a synergistic sort of energy that can come into play that is very creative at times. And prior to going to law school, I had the misfortune of being involved in a couple of nonprofit organizations that were wonderful organizations, had really laudatory work, but they, for various reasons, ran into some snags and largely imploded on themselves. You had members within the organization, members of the community that they served, all turning on each other. And in one instance, it almost led to the demise of the organization altogether. And I thought if there was a way to get everybody in the room and talking to each other and coming up with creative solutions to the problems that were presenting themselves, that could have been so much better. There could have been so much energy that could have been better placed in serving the community rather than turning in on itself. And so it was something that I felt like I was really motivated to do.
Great. So what have you found most rewarding about being a facilitator?
Well, it's, meeting facilitation is interesting as distinguished from mediation because you have a whole lot of different voices in the room. You have varying levels of investment, you have a lot of different perspectives, and the challenge becomes walking into a facilitation and saying, okay, so where is the dividing line here? Because as much as people want to say, oh, we're here for the whole group, there typically, in my experience, is at least some kind of dividing line where you have people on one side of the line or the other. And there are lots of stories, and not all of those stories are necessarily being told. And so it's a way to, as expeditiously as possible, get those stories out there, to get that energy into the room and find out, okay, so what is the way in which we can take this energy and really move it towards resolution that is going to serve this organization and, in some cases, the community that they serve.
So what in all of that, what have you found most challenging about being a meeting facilitator?
Well, facilitation, prior to becoming a facilitator myself, I've sat in some community meetings that almost turned into riots. Literally, people shouting at each other, people making threats against each other. In one meeting, there were probably 150 people in the room. I can't say that as a facilitator I've encountered anything nearly that dramatic, but there are people, it's easy to hide in a crowd, and so sometimes people will hold back with their stories and they become increasingly resentful, and then sometimes they'll just really kind of explode. And you sometimes have, in my experience at least, there's at times been some very explosive sorts of demonstrations by individuals. And again, you want to welcome those stories, you want to welcome that being brought into the process, but obviously you need to be able to keep it contained and moving towards some sort of a resolution.
So given all that, what advice might you have for a new facilitator or people interested in meeting facilitation?
Well, I think that you have to, this is going to sound very perhaps naive, I think you just have to kind of genuinely like people and recognize that I think people really do, for the most part, want to get along, especially if you have a large group of people. They've obviously gathered for some purpose in the first place. They have some sort of a common concern. And it's like, how can we get people, what do you need? You need to have faith that people really can find some sort of identity and resolution around the common thing that they're gathered around. And it's like, okay, because we don't even necessarily have to like each other, but we really do agree on this thing that we're gathered for. So how can we come into that and make that a good experience for everybody involved as best we can? You have to have that kind of belief that that can happen.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Scott, for taking the time to meet with me today and sharing all of your time with community boards.
Absolutely.